Donald Trump, President of the United States, had a White House gaggle today, easily the most accessible president of my lifetime. He said something I want to make sure that you heard. Cut number 15.
Iran is very high on my list of things to watch. And as you probably know, I sent them a letter just recently. And I said, you're going to have to make a decision one way or the other. And we're going to either have to talk and talk it out, or very bad things are going to happen to Iran. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. My big preference, and I don't say this through strength or weakness, my big preference is we work it out with Iran. But if we don't work it out, bad things are going to happen to Iran.
All right, that is pretty blunt. There are at least 7 B-2s at Diego Garcia. I'll be talking with Matt Continetti, Ben Domenech about that. Do not miss those conversations coming up. I hope you saw Elon Musk with Bret Baier last night. Fascinating interview. Absolutely fascinating interview. Listen to this promise, cut number 1.
Budgetary savings goals, and how much do you think you've achieved so far?
Our goal is to reduce the deficit by $1 trillion. From a nominal deficit of $2 trillion to try to cut the deficit in half to $1 trillion, or looked at it in total federal spending to drop the federal spending from $7 trillion to $6 trillion. At a high level, you should think of this as we want to reduce the spending by eliminating waste and fraud, reduce the spending by 15%, which seems really quite achievable. The government is not efficient, and there's a lot of waste and fraud. So we feel confident that a 15% reduction can be done without affecting any of the critical government services.
This was a very important interview, I think, for Elon Musk. It was so serious. And the guys that he brought with him, and Bret did a great job, of course, the guys he brought with him, Dozier's a very serious project. And we have to get serious because we are now over the amount of debt that we carried in World War II. And we have got to cut everywhere where we can, every dime. We've got to get rid of stuff that we ought not to be doing. I mean, little stuff like NPR, PBS, Corporation for Public Broadcasting. We got to get rid of the NEA, the NEA. We got to get rid of everything that isn't absolutely mission critical. And I think Elon Musk is doing that. Now, I also want to go back to President Trump because he took time to single out a couple of people for particular praise today. Cut number 12.
You and your team apprehended a top 3 leader in the violent gang MS-13 yesterday, just 30 minutes outside of Washington, D.C. What has made you and your team so effective in finding, locating, apprehending, and deporting these violent, illegal migrants?
I love this guy. I wish more people would ask questions like that. But thank you. That's very nice. I appreciate it. And they happen. All you're doing is being fair with you when you ask a question in that way. Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and all of the rest of law enforcement. I think we have to include ICE and Border Patrol. Paul of Border Patrol, the whole group from Border Patrol. They're so incredible, and it's dangerous stuff, hard stuff, and it's really an unforced error because these people were allowed into this country and they shouldn't have been in this country. They would have never been in this country. We're getting rid of some of the worst criminals in the world. They came out of jails and mental institutions from all over the world. But Pam and the whole group, and Kash, who's here, and it's so good to have him. I see him all over. He's working 24 hours a day, but the job they've done is incredible. And they caught one of the worst criminals in the world, I guess, in terms of evilness. You don't get any worse than the MS-13 guys and the Tren de Aragua guys. You could flip a coin. It's a rough group. And, the big thing is they have to be able to do their job. I was watching it on television like you, and I saw the home that he lived in a good area, but boy, they had a lot of weaponry in there, right? Highly sophisticated, really brutal stuff. So I appreciate the question, and I just want to thank Kash and Pam and the whole group for doing a fantastic, and the local law enforcement who's been so terrific working with local law enforcement and even first responders. So I want to thank everybody and thank you very much.
I'm particularly appreciative of President Trump today because I can't tell you what's in it. I am reading the book Fight by John Allen and Amy Parnes, and there's an embargo on it till Tuesday. And I'll interview them by tape on Monday, and I'll play it for you on Tuesday when the embargo lifts. all I can tell you is you will be so relieved. You're already relieved. We have a president. You'll be so relieved when you know what we had until Donald Trump returned when you read this book. I can't tell you what's in the book, but it's shocking. And it's going to be a bestseller. It's going to be number one. It's the first book on the Biden Regency. And I'm not going to say anything more. We'll cover that on Tuesday of next week. Look, I don't want to be down the whole day. I want to celebrate the fact that the Guardians won yesterday and baseball's back. And the Cavaliers won last night, and they're great. Oh, Secretary Rollins has joined us. Hello, Secretary. How are you?
Well, hello, sir. I'm so good. It's great to be on with you.
It's great to talk to you. You know, first thing I wanted to ask you, people do not know you're our secret weapon. You're a hell of a lawyer. Did you have Lino Graglia when you were at UT Law School?
You know what? I did. Actually, I had Charles Allen Wright, who was sort of
Oh,
the
my
godfather.
gosh.
Yes, and then, in fact, constitutional law was one of my fastballs. It was an amazing, amazing run. But, yeah, they were just, what a time. And now to see it all kind of come to full circle has been just such a blessing.
Well, I'm so glad you're in the administration. Texas Public Policy Institute does such good work, and I knew as soon as you came back, you were in Trump 1, that you were going to swing for the fences. Can we start with the woke seeds? Because, you know, government should not be messaging in a non-viewpoint neutral way. That's why I brought up your con law background. I couldn't believe what I saw you put online. This is a small thing for a department of 100,000 people with 27 agencies, but it's very indicative of how broken the federal government was when you got there. Tell us about the woke seeds.
Well, first of all, I mean, the stuff we have canceled, the contracts of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars for transgender farmers and food justice, whatever any of that means, in New York and San Francisco, the study of menstrual cycles in transgender men, the trying to expand diversity, equity, and inclusion into the pest management industry. I mean, you just can't even believe the crud that we are uncovering every single day. So put that kind of as a frame of reference. So one of our awesome staffers that came in with me to USDA was, wandering around one day and found a box behind a door in one of the offices. And, we're trying to clean out metaphorically, figuratively, and literally.
And literally, yeah.
The USDA. And he opened the box, and inside the box was a whole packet of tomato seeds that were branded for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, United States Department of Agriculture. So what in the world, how are we using taxpayer dollars to brand? I guess they thought tomatoes were racist. They kind of think everything's racist. I guess they thought tomatoes were racist.
I couldn't
and that
believe
they
it.
needed to brand it. I know,
couldn't believe
crazy.
it. And I say the Biden Regency hid much more than it revealed. We don't really know who was running what during the Biden Regency, but that is indicative of a department that's out of control. Let's talk about the real job, which is helping America's farmers sell their stuff abroad. You're going abroad pretty soon, and you're going to be out there making the pitch for American farm products. Where are you going?
Well, I am. The first thing I think is really just one more insanity left over from Joe Biden, that when we left in the first Trump administration, we had a surplus on our agriculture exports, meaning our farmers were not just, making money here in the U.S., but the export piece was a really important part of it, selling our incredible goods across the world. When we took back over just a few months ago, after 4 years of Joe Biden, that surplus had not only turned into a deficit, it had turned into a $49 billion deficit, meaning we were selling $49 billion less in 4 years of our ag products overseas. And we have lost a lot of farms in those 4 years, a lot of bankruptcies. It's just been devastating for a lot of reasons. So just this morning, we announced we're hitting the world, not hitting the country, but hitting the world to begin to expand again and getting our goods and services back across America. Peru, Vietnam, Japan, the United Kingdom, Brazil, and India. I'll be hitting all of those countries in the next few months. Again, working to expand those markets and hopefully getting our farmers back into the profit margin, which they haven't seen in a long, long time.
Now, Madam Secretary, good luck on that. Hope you get your sleep down because you're going to go through a lot of time zones, but you got a lot of great American farm products to sell. I want to switch if I can, and we got to go to a break and send a signal down, but I'll keep talking to you. I want to talk to you about endangered species. The Forest Service is yours, right? You run the Forest
That's
Service.
right. That's exactly right.
And I don't know if you've got a Forest Service director yet. Have you put someone in charge of it yet?
We have. We're making significant changes at the top. We've announced our undersecretary is a businessman from West America, Idaho, and he's going to bring a whole new. Now, he still has to get confirmed. He's going through the Senate process right now, but we're making significant change.
Okay, what I want to talk to you about, let me pause here for a moment, is the spotted owl, the fire management risk, and the devastation of our national forests because of environmental extremism that dates back 20 years. Brooke Rollins, she leads the Department of Agriculture. Within the Department of Agriculture is the U.S. Forest Service, meaning millions and millions of acres of timber. And you wouldn't know this, Secretary Rollins, for 27 years. I'm retired. I was an endangered species lawyer. And I went after trying to get 10A permits for things like the spotted owl and the Stevens kangaroo rat and all this different stuff. But I always watched in amazement at the federal government letting our forests burn down. Do you think you can develop with your new director a 10A permit with Doug Burgum's help that is just a forest management fire prevention permit that is off the shelf and available to any USDA contractor to use without fear or favor, so we can stop our fires, our forests from burning down so wantonly?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And here's the thing, this whole cabinet, we don't care what's next. We're all called to help save the country. We're obviously going very bold and very fearless, not just last month, this month, but for the next 4 years. And that's what's really important. And Doug is a great friend of mine. We both understand how devastating the Endangered Species Act has been and how much how silly all of it is at this point. There's probably some of it that's worth saving, but most of it we've got to redirect. So, yes, we're on it, and I think you'll see some pretty significant changes moving forward quickly.
Very last question. You served President Trump in term 1. You're back in term 2. I sense a seriousness of purpose and a calmness and a resolution in him that, first time you go around, you're just learning everything. What do you think? Trump 1 versus Trump 2?
Well, I was there year 2, year 3, and year 4 of Trump 1. I lived it. I lived the impeachments. I lived the COVID. I lived the weaponization, against him while we were in office. I lived the bureaucracy. I lived the administrative state. I was running as domestic policy counsel. This is different. We now know what we're doing. We've assembled the team. I hate that the president had the 4 years of dealing with, almost dying right from assassination, from facing 1,000 years in prison. I mean, you had to go through that. But I think God may have had a bigger purpose, and that 4 years and the ability to prepare and to organize and to understand what we were being called to do and to meet this moment will never happen again in American history. But I think that's why you see the president so serious and so intentional, but also with joy, right? There's joy in his heart now, and our cabinet is just joyful. I mean, we're obviously facing some of the biggest challenges our country has ever faced, even from the beginning 250 years ago, but we're ready for the challenge, and I think we're meeting the moment.
I think you are too. And Secretary Rollins, thank you for your time today. When you're back from your travels, call and give us a checkup on how it went. And anytime, anywhere, I'll talk to you at length because I love serious lawyers and big job, and that's you. And good luck to you. Let us know how we can be of help because you're at a big job at an important time, not just for our farmers, for our country. Thank you for serving.
Well, listen, any interview that starts off with Lino Graglia, my old law school professor, I'm in forever. So I will be a regular guest on your show, and very happily so, sir.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Safe travels to you.
Thank you. You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'm pleased to welcome Congressman Rick Crawford. He represents a district in Arkansas, but he really is in charge of all of us because he's chair of the House Intel Committee. And if there's an important job out there, it's that one. Congressman, welcome to the program. Good to see you.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
I'm very glad to have you. I'd like to ask you first. We got a bunch of B2s that are at Diego Garcia, and we're not making a big secret out of it. That's open source. What do you read into that?
Well, I think what we're seeing is sort of a reposturing that's kind of taking us back to the future, if you will. That is going back to that Cold War posture where we had those strategic assets placed in important places, and the Indo-PACOM is one of those really important places. So Diego Garcia was a really important part of our Cold War posture going up against the Soviets, and even, quite frankly, as a check and balance against the Chinese going back years. So it's probably no secret or no surprise that Diego Garcia is an important location for us strategically in the Indo-Pacific.
Do you think President Trump is sending a message to the Ayatollah Khamenei? Because that's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, here's what I would say is that he has reached out and said, "Hey, let's talk it over." They kind of spit it back in his face. All right, I mean, if that's the way you want to receive the message, that's okay. But what the president is making it clear that we're gonna take care of America, and we're gonna look out for American assets and be there for our own interests as well as the interests of our allies. So I think this is somewhat Reagan-esque. I mean, I'm a child of the Cold War. I served in the military under President Reagan, and it's kind of refreshing to see that approach to the peace through strength posture that says we're going to make a military that's so big and so effective that nobody would dare challenge it. And I think that's his goal, is to basically say we want peace, but we're also prepared if you decide to decline that.
Now, Mr. Chairman, we got a lot in common. You're a radio guy, rodeo guy, rock and roll guy, and now you're interested in intel. So we got a lot of overlap, but let's focus on the Cold War upbringing. Do you think America understands we're in a conflict with China that is the equal, if not more dangerous than the one we went through with the Soviet Union for 5 decades?
I'm not sure that they do, and I've been going back and sort of reviewing history of Cold War history, and there's a lot of stuff. There seems to be a resurgence in the interest of sort of what the Cold War was like, the historic perspective, and I think there's a reason why you're seeing platforms like Netflix and Prime address these topics a little more. And I think that's great, and I don't know that we're necessarily getting the greatest interpretation of that history. That's not what I'm saying, but I think there's a lot more stuff out there, and I think young people would do well to sit in front of that and get a little bit of an understanding of what that entailed and how close we came a couple of times to really having a nuclear escalation that could have threatened the world. And I think we're about the same age, so we've lived through that history, and I think it's kind of lost on a generation. And I think it's good to see them, reaching back and saying, remind me of why it's important that we develop this kind of posture, because we saw that we were engaged with an adversary in the Soviet Union in various ways, proxy wars. They had theirs, we had ours, but over the course of that roughly 50-year period, you never knew from one day to the next. I mean, I was deployed. I'm a veteran of Charlie Wilson's War.
Oh, really?
Very few people know any of that, the history of that. And you go back and watch Charlie Wilson's War, it's a great reminder of that. But I mean, I was boots on the ground, and so I have a different perspective about the Cold War, and it wasn't just for show. We had active engagements from time to time, and that was one example. Of course, Vietnam was our longest proxy war, and let's be honest about it. We were fighting against not only the Soviet Union but the Chinese influence in that Vietnam area and throughout that region. And so I think it does us well to be able to sort of reconnect with history and say, what do we learn from that, and how do we not make the mistakes of the past going forward, and why it's important.
It is simply coincidence, but I'm very glad that we have a couple of soldiers, you and Senator Cotton, from Arkansas, who are chairing the Senate and the House Intel Committee. Because it's sort of a common sense job, but it's got to be deadly serious, and you're serious guys, and you know what it's like to serve in uniform. I don't. I'm a civilian. Let me close by asking you this. President Trump's got his national security team in place. They're doing great work. The Houthis are figuring that out. Do you believe that Kash Patel is going to be able to turn around the FBI's counter-espionage effort, get it focused on the Chi-Coms, and get it working against... I mean, they're everywhere. They're all over the United States. I don't know that we really know the depth of that challenge. I think it's greater than when I served President Reagan at the Department of Justice, the Soviets mounted against us. I think it's everywhere.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's pervasive. It's one of the primary challenges and one of my priority issues as chairman of this committee, and I don't think there's anybody any better equipped to deal with it than Kash Patel. I think he's articulated that very well. He's a sharp guy, and I thought, and I watched the game film on the Senate side. I watched their hearing, and obviously participated in ours. And I think Kash Patel acquitted himself very, very well. And look at the results that he's had already in such a short span of time with the efforts that he's undertaken with the Abbey Gate bomber, for example, with MS-13. And some others that they've just been doing some really fantastic work along with DOJ. So he is the guy, and I think he's going to do a fantastic job on that effort.
Chairman Crawford, please keep coming back. Call us anytime you want to get a message out there or talk intel. We can do it forever on the Hugh Hewitt Show, and I appreciate your time. Enjoy the weekend, and thank you, Congressman.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Iran is very high on my list of things to watch, and as you probably know, I sent them a letter just recently, and I said you're going to have to make a decision one way or the other, and we're going to either have to talk and talk it out, or very bad things are going to happen to Iran, and I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. My big preference, and I don't say this through strength or weakness, my big preference is we work it out with Iran. But if we don't work it out, bad things are going to happen to Iran.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That was Donald Trump earlier today at the White House. I am joined, as I am on most Fridays when I am lucky, by Matt Continetti at the American Enterprise Institute, Washington Free Beacon columnist, Commentary Magazine columnist, and commentary podcaster. Matt, I want to begin with the most important thing. The president said that today, even as 7 B-2s are parked at Diego Garcia. What do you think he is prepared to do?
Well, I think the deployment of the B-2s to that strategic location, Hugh, is a sign that he's prepared to use strength, and he's prepared to show the Iranians that he's willing to use military force to defeat, disable, and set back their nuclear program. Whether he does that, I think, is another question. But he's definitely showing a readiness to do so that I think Tehran will notice.
Now, Tehran could do it the easy way. South Africa denuclearized. Ukraine denuclearized. It is possible to do it, but the first step is you open the doors to everything, and you ask the IAEA to come in and inspect, and then the world monitor. It is possible to do that. Do you think Iran is likely to do that?
Well, it's possible for Hamas to lay down its arms, to release the remaining hostages, to release the bodies of the dead hostages, and to leave Gaza. But Hamas doesn't do it because Hamas is a genocidal terrorist organization bent on Israel's destruction. The regime in Tehran is similarly ideological. It is a revolutionary regime. It came to power in 1979. Its whole ideology is about death to America and death to Israel. So whether Iran is willing to give up this nuclear program, the full kit and caboodle, in a act of deference to the president of the United States demands, is something that I consider highly unlikely. I think it's much more likely, Hugh, that the Iranians are going to try to do what they've done for the past 20 years. They're going to try to divert the United States into endless negotiations, and they're going to try to hold out that carrot of a diplomatic solution for as long as it takes so that they can get through the Trump presidency, just as they've gone through earlier American presidents.
Matt Continetti, I've always told people, I worked for developers for 30 years. Donald Trump is a developer at his soul. He knows when he's being played. I don't think he can be played by the mullahs. If he thinks he's being played, I think he's going to bomb Iran. Now, last night I got a call from an old friend, a Marine, retired Marine, serious conservative, serious about national security, doesn't want to go to war with Iran. I said, a 96-hour bombing campaign is not going to war with Iran. It can effectively demolish their nuclear program, and it doesn't have to go further than that, although I imagine they would try and retaliate some way. What do you think would be the effectiveness of 96 hours of B-2s and what the Iranian response would be?
Well, I do think that we would be effective. We have the capacity to deal huge blows to the Iranian nuclear program and to the Iranian ability to retaliate against the United States. Let's not forget, we destroyed the Iranian Navy during the tanker war in the late 1980s. Was that a war? It's not the war as we understand it today. It wasn't an endless war. It lasted a little bit of time. There were casualties. But we achieved our aim. And let's also not forget that Israel just recently destroyed the Iranian air defense system in Israel's response to the second of two unprovoked attacks on Israel by Iran last year. Israel took out their air defense system and also severely reduced their ability to manufacture their ballistic missiles. So we have the ability, I think, to deal a huge, heavy blow to the Iranian nuclear program and to subsidiary targets that would limit Iran's capacity to respond to us. Will they try to respond? Of course. Typically the mullahs opt for subterfuge, and they try to assassinate their opponents. They try to sponsor terrorist attacks. This is the world's largest sponsor of terrorism. And of course, they are still trying to assassinate President Trump for his decision to take out Qasem Soleimani back in 2020. So no one wants this outcome, but we are reaching the moment of decision, Hugh, not just because that Iran is vulnerable right now, thanks to the Israelis, but also because Iran is dangerous and could get more
Very
so
close
with a
to
nuclear
nuke.
bomb.
Matt, I did not listen to today's commentary podcast yet, so I don't know if you covered it. Israel passed judicial reform, and lo and behold, the Jewish state did not collapse. I've always thought it was kind of a weird sort of surrogate for hating on Netanyahu, and it's not that radical a reform, and it doesn't take effect until after at least one general election more. What did you make of what they did and the build up to it and the kind of non-response after it?
Well, Hugh, as you know, and as you've covered on the show this week, Israel is in the midst of a political crisis. Now, I'm of the view that as an outsider, I shouldn't get too involved in Israel's political crises. That's for Israel to decide. I'm more about defending Israel from its attacks here in the United States and from the broader anti-Israel network around the world. But I will say that the legislation you mentioned, which did increase the parliament's role in judicial selection, did pass. Israeli democracy is not over. At the same time, this bill was slightly smaller than the judicial reform that was proposed in the summer of 2023. That really was, as you say, the catalyst for a lot of anti-Netanyahu activity and almost tore the country apart. So I actually think this measure may have been the more responsible way to approach this subject piecemeal. And I think that Israel has plenty of strengths that will enable it to flourish despite what we might be reading in the media or what we might be hearing from the Israeli left.
Have you noticed that Haviv Rettig Gur has begun a podcast called Ask Haviv Anything?
I have, and I often ask Haviv things. He's an authority and someone to definitely listen to on this subject.
So what I want to ask you is, why is he so good? I mean, so good that I could put him on every day. And I don't get into internal Israeli domestic politics. It's above my pay grade, and I don't know enough. I don't want to be stupid. So I ask him questions, but he's awfully persuasive. And I'm wondering, why is he that way?
Well, I think he has a wonderful sense of history. He knows the topic, he knows the region, and he also has excellent English. And I do think that a limit for many Israeli public figures when they speak to Western audience is their English is not as good as we often expect. I think the ability to speak and write in English is one reason why Benjamin Netanyahu has gone so far in Israeli politics, but also as the leader and symbol of the Jewish state for so long, for so much of the world. And so I think that ability to speak lucidly, to communicate so fluently is one of Haviv's many strengths as well.
And we're coming to a transition. For years and years and years, we've had Ron Dermer and Michael Oren and the Prime Minister himself talking to American audiences, and they need a bench. And I think Haviv Rettig Gur is their bench, and it's a good bench. Matt, I received this week, and I began last night, the book Fight by John Allen and Amy Parnes. Now, I'm embargoed from telling you what's in it. All I can say is it's going to be a #1 bestseller, and I'm shocked. I mean, I'm really shocked. I think we're all going to be shocked about the Biden regency the more we learn about it. Do you think the American people have any idea about the last year of the Biden presidency?
Well, I think the American people have an instinct about the last several years of the Biden presidency. And let's not forget that it was pretty clear beginning in 2023 that majorities of Americans, including a majority of Democrats, did not want Biden to run for another term in office. So when you couple that with Biden's sustained unpopularity, indeed his record unpopularity when we think about how he left office and the way that the public continues to view him today, The American people have known for some time that he was simply ill-equipped to be the president of the United States, and he certainly did not deserve a second term and should not have run for a second term. As for the actual details, no, I think we aren't really prepared for what we might learn in some of these journalistic exposés. And this, I think the book that you mentioned will be the beginning of many that will talk about the state of the Biden White House as he deteriorated. You know, I've often wondered what was going on in some of those Biden group chats. You know, if we ever get access to those, I think the American people will be rightly scandalized once again.
We're going to get access to some of those, Matt. I won't say anything more than that. Let me ask you this. I'm not for constitutional amendments because they can't pass. But I'm beginning to think, although I have absolutely no doubt that President Trump has the energy and mental acuity to do the job, and in fact, benefited by the 4 years he was out of the job. And he's 78, and I think he's going to be just fine for the 4 years. But when we're done with that, do you think we ought to consider an age limit for the Supreme Court, the presidency? Not the Senate. You can be 110 and be in the Senate. That's a legislative job. What do you think about an age limit for the presidency and the Supreme Court?
When Nikki Haley surfaced this idea during the Republican primaries, I thought it was worth considering. You're right, constitutional amendments are very hard to pass unless you're President Biden and you can just create one with your auto pen, and a tweet. But if you want that constitutional amendment to be legitimate, it does take a lot of work and effort. I do think people will have a different view of older candidates going forward, and I think that's healthy. President Trump, of course, despite being close to 80, no one really sees him as suffering from any type of cognitive
No, he's got
decline.
the energy of a 30-year-old.
Exactly.
Ridiculous.
So it doesn't really apply to him. But down the line, I do think this rising generation of voters who have swung right, I think, are going to take older candidates with a heavy dose of skepticism.
I had Lord Andrew Roberts on this week, and I'm struck that not only was Biden not there, but Franklin Roosevelt wasn't there at Yalta, and Woodrow Wilson wasn't there for a half year. So we've had 3 brushes with this kind of a crisis in less than 110 years. We really can't do this anymore. Matt, let me turn to NPR. I don't think Catherine Maher is a bug. I think she's a feature. I think the media at NPR, PBS, and CPB has gone over the edge and over the cliff, and I will be personally disappointed if the Republicans do not end all 3 public funding. Now, they can exist as long as they want on the backs of their donors and their sponsors and their advertisers, but do you think we're done with them after that performance?
Well, I hope so. I mean, Maher in particular, it's amazing to me she's still in that role, even after the material was disclosed that came up during this hearing, all of the things she said about President Trump, all of her far left positions on race issues and on gender issues. She still somehow persists, and I think that Congress should fix that. It is interesting, Hugh. I've had people come to me and say, well, it's not always fair to lump NPR in with PBS, and that they're different audiences, and PBS is slightly different than NPR in its financial model. So I would, if I were a Republican congressman, I would focus on NPR, which is completely ideologized. If you look at what Uri Berliner, who left NPR to join the Free Press, has said about what's going on there, that is an institution that has it doesn't have the need for federal assistance, and it does not deserve any federal assistance.
And they do have some excellent journalists. I think Steve Inskeep is a national treasure. I don't think David Brooks is a conservative, but he certainly is a smart guy that I listen to and I read. But these institutions, they've all gone to the left, and that brings me to the Democratic Party. I think I have underestimated how far to the left they have gone. And I think the Overton window came up on the Commentary podcast this week. They really, or maybe it was Coward Piven, they have really gone over the edge. There are a few left, like Wes Moore and Chris Coons and Josh Shapiro, who are kind of old school center-left Democrats. But have I missed the fact that they drove the bus over the cliff?
No, you've been covering it pretty closely. I mean, just think about the headlines coming from the Democratic Party in recent weeks. You have the far left bombing Tesla dealerships. You have the Democratic Party is calling on Chuck Schumer to resign for funding the government. I mean, the Democrats are the party of government, and yet they're enraged at Schumer for keeping the government open. You have Bernie Sanders and AOC drawing these huge crowds on their tour, but Bernie Sanders and AOC are socialists. And if there's one thing that we've learned from the past 10 years is that the American people don't want socialism. So is it really in the Democratic Party's interest to put Bernie and AOC as their mascots? No, it's not. And yet the party is reeling toward that side of the political spectrum. And it's not healthy for the Democrats. There's going to have to be a turn if the Democrats going to get back into power. But that turn, I think, is a ways down the road.
They can go the way of the Whigs. Parties do disappear. And from their remnants come a new party. And that may happen. Matt, last week, John Ellis of Ellis News Items sent me a note that Friends in the 80s averaged between 25 and 26 million viewers per episode. Their finale had 50 million viewers. Now, Sean Hannity, very good at his job. He averages 4 million viewers a night, more than NBC primetime shows. And Fox News has 14 out of 15 of the most watched shows in cable. I think we're also saying not just the collapse of the Democratic Party, but the collapse of broadcasting and legacy media. And I don't think I'm overstating it. I think they're really in a crisis. Do they have a plan?
Well, the broadcast networks have something of a plan, and it's streaming. Whether it works or not, we'll have to see. But the mainstream media as a whole, I think, has a big problem on its hands. And they're going to have to look toward alternative means of communicating with people, whether that is through online platforms, whether that's through streaming or podcasts. The Fox, we have to understand that the reason Fox is so popular is because Fox lives up to its mission. And it gives you the news up through 7 o'clock, and then after 7 o'clock, it gives you opinions. And it's opinions that resonate, unlike what the mainstream media offers so much of the time.
It's also well produced, Matt. And I don't want to make too broad of a sweeping statement. The people on Fox are smarter than the people on the other networks. And by that, I think they read books. I think they read out of their niche. I think they try and stay informed across the spectrum of opinion. Do you think that they do that at the other news networks anymore?
Well, the other news networks, Hugh, suffer from living in the bubble. And this is just something that is an advantage for people who, even if they don't call themselves conservatives, want to play things fair and straight, is that you have to look at both sides. But what we know from liberal journalists is that they don't look at both sides. They look at their own side, and then they cast everyone to the right of them as a Trump-loving fascist or threat to democracy. And Americans aren't willing to accept that anymore. When you have President Trump winning the popular vote, winning every swing state, you see this cultural shift to the right, embrace of traditional values, traditional roles. They don't take the mainstream media seriously anymore. And
that's it.
It's looking more and more like a joke to most Americans.
And when people start to laugh at you, you're done. Matt Continetti, people aren't laughing at you. They're listening to you. Thank you for spending time with me. Follow him on X at Continetti. Read him at the Washington Free Beacon and listen to him on the Commentary Podcast. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Hugh.
Coming up after the break, Ben Domenech joins me to do a weekend review. I do want to do the market check today because it was a pretty rough day on the market, and it's been a rough week on the market. Again, Republicans have got to get that tax bill passed because I understand the Trump plan. It's got two parts, and one of the parts is the tax bill, and it's just got to get done. This is brought to you by our friends at AmericanFederal.com. You can call them at 800-221-7694, 1-800-221-7694. Nick Grovich and the team will sell you gold, but it's going to cost you more this week than it did last week because gold went up by 0.75% today to $3,114 an ounce. Never seen that before. Don't know how high it's going to go. Nick told me in an email, if you listen to this show regularly, you heard me tell this like a month ago, he thought they would hang around 3,000 for a while and then it would break out and it would be a bull market. Might not be hanging around for very long. I don't make predictions, not a prophet, not the son of a prophet. I don't give investment advice. But I sure do watch gold. And at $3,113 an ounce, it's got my eyes pretty big. And I'm glad I bought it when I normally do in January. Maybe it'll correct. Maybe it won't. I don't know. The Dow today went down or is down almost 1.64%. The S&P is down almost 2%. The NASDAQ is down 2.5%, actually more than 2.5%. As I said, stocks fall on tariff, consumer sentiment fears. I don't worry about the market. I do watch the gold as an indication of people being uneasy, and the gold price says that people are uneasy. I think they're uneasy because the House passed that tax bill a month ago, and we haven't got movement. We haven't got a plan. I don't really care what's in the final bill. If they just extend the Trump tax cuts, on the tax, I want border, I want the wall, I want the defense build up, I want energy deregulation, but mostly I want them to lock in 5 to 10 years, or if not permanent, tax cuts, so America can invest based on the Trump tax plan. I want to go back to the pre-COVID economy that Donald Trump built in Trump term 1, and that requires deregulation, which will take time to kick in, and tax reform, which means that the House and the Senate have got to go. But if you want to buy gold, do it from AmericanFederal.com at 1-800-221-7694. Let me conclude by telling you about our sponsor, Job Creators Network. They have got a great website for you if you want to go to the Job Creator Freedom Fighters Summit. That is on May 1st and 2nd. The website is jcn2025summit.com. JCN, as in Job Creators Network, jcn2025summit.com. Use the promo code Salem. You'll see me, you'll see Bill Bennett, you'll see Mike Gallagher, you'll see Grover Norquist, Kellyanne Conway. I think Governor Youngkin is coming. I think Brian Kemp is coming, and Governor of Georgia. You'll see a bunch of like-minded people who believe in free enterprise and free thinking, all at the Job Creator Network Annual Freedom Fighters Summit, and you'll love Savannah, Georgia. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt is going with me. We hope we see you there in Savannah on May 1st and 2nd. Head over to get your tickets now and use the promo code Salem. You'll get half off on the second ticket. JCN2025summit.com, promo code Salem. That's JCN2025summit.com, promo code Salem. Ben Domenech is with us, editor-at-large for The Spectator. Got his own podcast over at Fox News. He's a Fox News contributor. Ben, I know you're a Washington Commanders fan. Are you also a Washington Nationals fan? Are you a baseball guy?
I was there yesterday for opening day.
Okay, so I don't know who calls the national game.
In fact, I also have tickets this entire season. I got one of their packages to have standing room only tickets to every single game.
Oh, you are a true
that means
fan.
That I can go straight from special report to the game if need be.
You are a true fan. Who calls their game? I'm a Guardians fan, so my entire life it's either been Herb Score or Tom Hamilton. They're the voice of baseball in my ear, but who is the voice of Washington Nationals baseball?
Well, so we actually are undergoing a transition right now because we had someone who had been calling the games for quite some time and then passed away. So unfortunately, but look, I actually go to the games, so I don't listen to the radio.
Really? All right. Well, I've got a special treat for the audience, of which you're going to be a part. I've been doing this a long time. I've probably done, I calculate, close to 30,000 interviews, not counting callers. This is my favorite interview of all time. I'm just going to play you 2.5 minutes from April 2012, cut number 17.
Oh, we had nuns, sisters of charity, and I might bore you with a little story.
Please.
There were times when they were not too charitable to this red-headed kid, and the reason was that I was very, very left-handed. And every time I would use my left hand, the good nun would hit me across the back of the knuckles with the flat of the ruler. And if I insisted upon using my left hand, occasionally she would turn the ruler so that she would hit me with the edge of the ruler, which broke the skin. And one night at dinner, passing the bread or whatever, my mother saw this cut-up hand, and she assumed that I had been punished for talking in class or whatever, and she would have been correct 99% of the time. But in this instance, I explained, no, it's because I'm using my left hand. Well, our family doctor, and I only use this because it works out very well, our family doctor was Jewish, and he sat down and wrote a letter to the Catholic nuns. And in the letter, he explained, among other things, that if you force this little boy to become right-handed, it might very well cause him to stutter, which would have changed my life dramatically. And then the last line of the letter, it said, and besides, dear sisters, why in the world would you want to change God's work?
Wow.
Well, we hit a grand slam with that line, and they allowed me to stay left-handed. And I was very, very familiar, long before the movie, with King George in England, who stuttered. I bet I read a book about him because I was left-handed, maybe 40 years ago. And the reason he stuttered was because he was basically and originally left-handed, and they made him right-handed. And from that book and from that story, they made the beautiful movie, The King's Speech.
Yes.
But they only alluded to the fact that he was left-handed, forced to be right-handed, in one quick throwaway line. But I really understood and was very empathetic to the king.
So, Ben Domenech, Vin Scully, the greatest of all time.
Can I share you my favorite
Please.
line?
I was hoping it would elicit one.
He was. There was a game. I can't actually remember who it was he was commenting on at the time, but a player came out having some particularly bushy sideburns, and his comment. Just, he made everything sound so easy. What ho, what men are these with sideburns like parentheses?
Oh! Do you know?
Oh my God! He once referred to a fly ball catch like catching a chick falling out of a tree.
Oh.
it's just a guy. I mean, the fact that he had the capability to make incredible moments awesome by waiting for the moment and then commenting with something perfect. It's a skill that I lack, Hugh, but it's one that I absolutely respect. One of the great memories of my life are tied to listening to some of these men over the years call these games. And I envy so much that skill. It's such an incredible one, and to have the right word for the right moment. It's, as Twain tells us, the difference between lightning and the lightning bug.
I'm going to attach that entire interview to our podcast from 2012 at the end of today's Big Weekend podcast.
I will tell you one person you should have on. If you do not have him in your regular rotation, Hugh, you should reach out to my good friend Bill James.
Oh,
who is a phenomenal interview. If you've not talked to him before,
I have not.
And his recollection for history around the game is so phenomenal that I never come away from any conversation with him without learning something.
Now, I brought it up today, not just because baseball is upon us, but because this morning I was reflecting on the fact that Cleveland fans, the sports gods do not smile on us, but we have been blessed with extraordinary sports writers. And I think sports journalism today has a lot to teach political journalism about objectivity, analytics, and how to do their job.
Funny you should say that, because I actually use that in a comparison that I make when I give speeches before audiences relative to young journalists who are coming up about the differences between these things, and that they should have that they should be more in common.
Yes.
Than the way they currently are. But please continue.
Well, I want you to expand on the NPR chief this week. Represents to me all that's gone wrong with media, and the Republicans had better sure as hell defund NPR, CPB, and PBS, and maybe NEA and NEH, because they're beyond reclamation. They're just ideologically lost. And I don't know when that happened to journalism, But sports journalism, it hasn't happened because they're still giving us the sports, the scores, the analytics. They're telling us who's doing well. Sports podcasting is amazing. The old journalism could go to school on new sports journalism.
I completely agree. And in fact, I would take it a step further and say that, one of the things that really has impressed me in this past decade is that sports podcasting has been so far ahead of political podcasting, meaning that and this is one of the things that I think is so important. It is important to remember that the audience is smarter than you think they are or than the producers think they are. Talk to your audience not as if they are dumb, but to raise them up to the level where you believe they truly are at. And who is that? To me, that's the smartest sports fan in the bar. It's the guy who's sitting at the bar who knows the team, knows the players, knows more than the friend group around him, okay, but is also an everyman, meaning that he has other priorities in his day. We should talk that way when we talk about politics. And yet, instead, what do we have? We have people who cater to the lowest common denominator, who have this fictional idea of someone who's an idiot out there, who doesn't know the way things work in politics. And yet, we have this running 24 hours a day coverage that happens where I just think unfortunately it's really low quality because we don't appreciate and respect the viewer of politics the way that we would a sports fan.
I agree.
Who will identify a
that's
bad
profound.
take in an instant.
Let me talk about the exception to that rule. Brett Baer, our friend, he talked to Elon Musk last night as though the audience was smart, and Elon Musk delivered. Did you watch that interview?
That interview is one of the most interesting interviews that I have seen on cable news in the last decade. It's so incredibly interesting. There's so much that comes out of it. And look, I think that, people, they'll get after us for sucking up to him and that kind of thing. I think Brett Baer's the last great newsman.
I think he's America's newsman now.
I think he's America's newsman, and the fact that he approaches the job that is incredibly difficult. I will say this, like people act like this is easy. It's not. It's very hard, and you're juggling a lot of different things. And to go into something like that and to have the level of questioning that he did, I think was really impressive. And what we got out of it, I was laughing throughout it because Elon kept, having zingers and that type of thing. He came ready to play. But, going into something like that, it's very easy to botch that. And if you botch it, nobody remembers it. They just say, whatever. But if you have something that comes out of it as interesting as that, that's the kind of thing that we're going to go back to and look at in the future, that you could assign tomorrow in whether you're in a poli-sci class or, something like that, to look at the different things that are going on in our government right now. And look, I'm very optimistic about this project. It's the first time that we actually have someone doing the work of fiscal conservatism within this government and asking the questions that need to be asked about the things that we're doing. And from my perspective, there's a direct line back to the Tea Party days and when we actually had people who said, look, we keep asking Washington to cut, and they keep saying there's no waste.
That's right. And Elon Musk has got the skill set and the staff to get it done. Ben, as I was telling Matt Continenty earlier, this week I received Fight by John Allen and Amy Parn, and I cannot discuss the particulars. It's embargoed until Tuesday. I can say, generally, I'm shocked. I'm absolutely mortified by what I'm reading. This is the first mover, so they have the first mover advantage. What do you think is going to be the end result of all the books about the last half of the Biden presidency?
I think the result is going to be an indictment of the journalistic class at large, and I think that you're also going to have an indictment of those within the Democratic Party who I think knew far earlier than the rest of us, particularly the donor class, that this was going on. And it's a sad indictment. And I want to be clear about this because it's easy as someone who does not share their ideology to kind of make light of this or to be joyful about this. And I am not joyful at all. I want a president who's competent regardless of what party he's in. I want a president who is aware of what's going on around him, regardless of what he's going to do with that knowledge. I don't want a president who is essentially, in the same position as Woodrow Wilson. And yet that looks increasingly like what we had without realizing it. And there's so many decisions that were made in the last year, months of the Biden administration to have enormous consequences. And look, I have respect for people on the other side. I'm friends with many of them, as you know. I'm friends with people who are in the kind of technocrat Democrat lane, because we're at loggerheads over Obamacare, and we came through that, and they got the best of that situation. But I think my critiques were well met and were vindicated ultimately in a lot of ways. But the point is, I respect them because I don't think that they're people who are bad people who have anti-American interests at heart. If you were an anti-American, what would you rather have than the last year of the Joe Biden presidency?
Yeah, and and to go back to what we were talking about, any sports journalist would have said about any athlete they were covering, not only has he lost his fastball, and not only can he not hit, he's gone Steve Sachs. He can't throw it to first base anymore. They would have told the truth. It's an indictment, and I'm not going to say anything about what's in fight, but it's an indictment of everybody who was close to the guy. Every single person.
There's a great line from John Updike talking actually about a situation with the New Yorker editor where he said, the job of an editor is to help a writer when he's lost his fastball. And to me, this is a situation where you can't afford to have someone who has completely lost not just their fastball, not just their curveball, not just their splitter, but any ability to actually function on the mound. And that, to me, is something that it's unacceptable. We live in an age of risk. We can't afford to have a president that's asleep at the wheel.
Yeah, you're being generous. It lost the ability to find the mound. The most important story of the week, which has gotten almost no coverage until Donald Trump spoke at the White House today, is what he said, and the backdrop to it are 7 B-2s parked at Diego Garcia that weren't there a week ago. Here's cut number 15,
Iran
President
is very
Trump at the White House.
On my list of things to watch. And as you probably know, I sent them a letter just recently, and I said, you're going to have to make a decision one way or the other. And we're going to either have to talk and talk it out, or very bad things are going to happen to Iran. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. My big preference, and I don't say this through strength or weakness, my big preference is we work it out with Iran. But if we don't work it out, bad things are going to happen to Iran.
Ben Domenech, what do you think he's saying? What do you think those B-2s mean?
What I think he's saying is that I think he's very bluntly sending the message with the presence of those B-2s of what he is willing to do. Look, we have a president who thinks of himself as being a peacemaker. He does not want to create new conflicts. In fact, I think he is, well in the camp of not wanting to leave any conflict behind when he eventually leaves this office. And because of that, I don't think he wants this scenario. But I think that he is also sending a message to Iran that if he has to do this, he is absolutely willing to pull the trigger. And that's something that they should hear, and they should hear it loud and clear, and they should take it seriously. And can I say one more thing about this?
Oh, please.
You said correctly that this is the most important story this week. I have been talking about this Signalgate situation all week, and one of the things that sticks out to me about it is how, in the grand scheme of things, it is far less important than what is going on in the world right now. I mean, I get that Jeff Goldberg gets a couple good news cycles out of it, and that's something that entertains DC and it spawns memes and that sort of stuff. And that's fine, well and good. Mike Waltz made a mistake and he covered for his staff, in my view, because as everyone who's ever worked in a congressional office in the last 15 years, 20 years knows, your contacts are not managed by the member; they are managed by the staff. And so that's the thing that I think was sort of distracting folks from what's going on in the world right now. And from my perspective, that is a very significant development in terms of the willingness of this administration to very seriously entertain the possibility that they need to use those B-2s in the way that we both know that they can use them. And that's something that Iran should pay attention to and not take lightly given the nature of this White House.
And as a matter of course, I always disclose Mike Waltz is a very good friend. My son works at the NSC. I always disclose that when it comes up.
I always forget that, but I will just. Can I just add one more thing?
Yeah, I just can't comment on it. But go ahead.
People are coming after Mike Waltz. The people who are coming after Mike Waltz, they're not coming after him because of this. They're coming after him because they disagree with his ideology about American policy and about American power projection, and it's completely unfair and duplicitous. And they're pretending that it's about something that it isn't about. And that's something that I, have observed. I think you probably have observed it too. And it's something that everyone who is an intelligent viewer of politics should understand. They're not going after him for the thing that they actually want to go after him for, which is a disagreement that is policy-based, ideology-based, and where Mike Waltz is in the right and they're in the wrong.
I would direct everyone to what Vice President Vance had to say about it today at Greenland. I'm not going to comment on it for the reason I just stated, but I would direct everyone there. I can, however, get your comment on Vice President Vance in Greenland today, cut number 18.
I think a lot of Americans wonder, why does Greenland matter so much? Why does the mission of this base matter so much to the American people? And I learned a lot about that today myself. Of course, you can read about it in a book, but I saw it up close and personal. And if, God forbid, to my fellow Americans, if a missile was fired from an enemy country or an enemy submarine into the United States, it is the people here before us who would give notice to our brave men and women further south in the United States to let people know what was coming and, God willing, to try to shoot it down and prepare for it. That's one of the things that we do at installations like this. We know that Russia and China and other nations are taking an extraordinary interest in Arctic passageways and Arctic naval routes, and indeed in the minerals of the Arctic territories. We need to ensure that America is leading in the Arctic, because we know that if America doesn't, other nations will fill the gap where we fall behind.
So Ben Domenech, I want to give you enough time to talk about this. The Panama Canal, the Canada baiting, and the Greenland focus is of a piece about Cold War 2.0 with China, and to a certain extent their minor partner, Russia, North Korea, Iran. And I'm glad to see them talking about this. I really am. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm glad they're talking.
There's a reason that James Polk's portrait is back in the White House. I mean, this is an awareness of the need to defend our hemisphere, the need to understand America's position in a world where things, have frankly shaken up post-pandemic in lots of ways that we don't like. And everything the vice president said there, I think, is correct. We need to have an agreement with Greenland, whether it looks like something that involves a security agreement where we are ready to stand at its defense, where there's an understanding of partnership and along those lines, or whether it's something more significant, as the president has teased. This is all the more important given the way that things are shifting within the Arctic and the way that China and Russia are using their own tools to project power there and to potentially gather minerals and resources there that we should be, by all rights, pursuing as Americans in this moment.
So my last question, another bad week for the market. I don't really care because I invest for the long term and I assume the tax cuts will get passed and the market will rebound. But are you worried at all that this tax bill won't get through? Because they sure are taking their time.
They really are. And I think that it's unfortunate that we have had the number of stumbles early on Capitol Hill that I think Republicans have experienced, including things that I think that could have been easily anticipated. I share your view of this, and I too am a long-term investor, but it's one of these things where, people are jittery for a reason, and it's very important, especially for Republicans who are going to be, essentially starting their campaigns 6 months from now to run for re-election in the midterms, to get things right. And that to me includes, this tax bill, and it also includes, having a very clear message going into the fall that comes out both in the Virginia elections and flows into the next year's midterm.
Very last. I'm very grateful to Elise Stefanik, who I do not know. I think she's been a guest on my show once. Oh, my
gosh. She got the short end. That is just so unfair to her. She's a very nice lady. I mean, I don't know her well, but it's, she certainly has been a loyal soldier and done everything that this administration, wanted her to do. And it's just, I think it's a real botch.
But it's patriotic on her part. to step up and say, because she would love being the UN ambassador. She would love and she would kill it.
Of course, it's a career-making role. We've seen so many people emerge from it, but I think that she understands in this moment what's needed of her. I just hope that they have the virtue of giving her the kind of respect and things that she needs on the other end of this, because it was deeply unfair the way that this played out.
I agree completely. Ben Domenech, always a pleasure. You have a great weekend going to the Nationals. Didn't realize you were that. You're the Charles Krauthammer of the next generation.
I'm going from the Nets game to the Caps game on Sunday.
Well, that's good. Well, I'm sorry that your Washington team's going to get crushed by the Cavs. They're going to be a Cavalanche, Ben, a Cavalanche. If you're of an age, you saw Men in Black in theaters, Tommy Lee Jones, Will Smith. I had that flashback last night watching Elon Musk sit down with Brett Baer, and he brought the Men in Black with him, all extremely competent. Here's Aram Mogadassi, cut number 6, part of the Doge team.
I'll say the 2 improvements that we're trying to make to Social Security are helping people that legitimately get benefits, protect them from fraud that they experience every day on a routine basis, and also make the experience better. And I'll give you one example is at Social Security, one of the first things we learned is that they get phone calls every day of people trying to change direct deposit information. So when you want to change your bank account, you can call Social Security. We learned 40% of the phone calls that they get are from fraudsters.
40%?
That's right. Almost half.
All right, so that's what Doge is finding out. Let's go to Brad Smith of the Doge team from last night, cut number 7.
Well, I'd say there's a couple of things we're really committed to in our work at HHS. Number 1, making sure we continue to have the best biomedical research in the world. And number 2, making sure, which President Trump has said over and over again, that we 100% protect Medicare and Medicaid. But there's a lot of opportunity. So if I take NIH as an example, today, if you're an NIH researcher and you get a $100 grant at your university, today you get to spend 60 of that and your university spends 40 of that. The policy that we're proposing to make is that you get to spend 85 of that and your university spends 15. So that's more money going directly to the scientists who are discovering new cures. Another example at NIH is today they have 27 different centers. They got created over time by Congress, and they're typically by disease state or body system. There's 700 different IT systems today at NIH.
700 different IT systems.
IT software systems. They can't speak to each other.
So they don't talk to one another.
They have 27 different
This is
CIOs.
remarkable stuff. That's why you've got to watch the whole. Here's Tyler Hansen last night, part of the Doge team, cut number 8.
Do you guys all see this as a patriotic duty? I mean, is that really what this is about?
It's essential.
Right, I do, 100%. I was running 5 businesses in Houston, and I left that. I left great people to do this, and my wonderful wife said, go for it. And here I am. But I feel like this is me giving back to the country.
If we don't do this, we're sunk. The ship, unless this exercise is successful, the ship of America will sink. That's why we're doing it.
Now, one more. Anthony Armstrong. That was Elon Musk at the end. This is Anthony Armstrong, part of the Doge team, cut number 10.
You've got overstaffing. A good example of overstaffing would be the IRS has got 1,400 people who are dedicated to provisioning laptops and cell phones. So if you join the IRS, you get a laptop and a cell phone, you're provisioned. So if each of those IRS officers or employees provisioned 2 employees per day, you could provision the entire IRS in a little more than a month. So 12 times a year, you can re-provision.
Why would you have 1,400 people whose only job it is to give out a laptop and a phone?
Right. The whole IRS could be handled once a month. So that doesn't make any sense.
It's so much of it. One more from Elon Musk, cut number 5.
Well, this is a revolution, and I think it might be the biggest revolution in government since the original revolution. But at the end of the day, America is going to be in much better shape. America will be solvent. The critical programs that people depend upon will work, and it's going to be a fantastic future. But are we going to get a lot of complaints along the way? Absolutely. You know, one of the things I learned at PayPal was who complains the loudest and with the most amount of fake righteous indignation? The fraudsters. It's a tell. There's some of these NGOs that are crazy, like the $2 billion to Stacey Abrams' NGO that basically didn't exist and suddenly gets $2 billion awarded from the federal government. Why? And there are many such cases like that.
They're not messing around. They're playing for keeps.
Iran is very high on my list of things to watch. And as you probably know, I sent them a letter just recently. And I said, you're going to have to make a decision one way or the other. And we're going to either have to talk and talk it out, or very bad things are going to happen to Iran. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. My big preference, and I don't say this from strength or weakness, my big preference is we work it out with Iran. But if we don't work it out, bad things are going to happen to Iran.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That was Donald Trump at the White House earlier today. I am joined by Jim Garrity, Washington Post columnist, National Review senior political correspondent. Jim, there are 7 B-2s lined up on the runways of Diego Garcia. They're not normally there. The president says that. Do you think the imams are getting the message?
Strangely enough, apparently not. Trump was saying that in response to what would seem like a very equivocating, could go one way, could go the other way response from Iran after Trump had said, let's sit down, let's talk. Hugh, I was thinking about this in Trump's first term. Trump met with Vladimir Putin, met with Xi Jinping, met with Kim Jong-un. Would you say that any of those regimes ended up having a bad experience in their negotiations with Trump?
I think China did not like the tariffs at all, and they stayed when Biden came in. So that was probably the bad experience.
Okay, but by and large, sitting down and having the summit, very rarely goes badly for a foreign power with Trump. And I would argue, I think Trump has been not nearly as tough as he ought to be on Russia, China, North Korea. But on Iran, he's been real tough, and he never really offered to sit down with the Iranians. In fact, Qasem Soleimani could not be reached for comment on this, because he had a very different approach here, right? So here's the thing. Trump comes into office the second time, and he says, I'm willing to talk to Iran. If you're the mullahs, how do you not grab onto that and say, yes, where do you want to do it? Let's have the meeting. Let's chat. Because if he's not afraid to take shots at your guys. All of this is very clear. Trump would love to get a deal, but he also is not afraid to strike the Iranians very hard. He's been talking about sanctions. He's been talking about all these other options he's got in front of them. If you are the Iranian mullahs, this is you've lost Syria. You've lost, Russia's got it tied up with its costs and everything going on in Ukraine. Maybe China is going to be friendly, maybe not, but China's not going to stick its neck out very long. Talking to Donald Trump is the best opportunity you've got to avoid further conflict, possibly. And Trump has already shown that he's perfectly willing to punch you in the mouth.
You've just made a very important point, so I want to draw a line underneath it. Trump will talk to anyone. He'll talk to Kim Jong-un. He'll talk to Putin. He'll talk to Xi Jinping. Xi is our most dangerous, deadly adversary by far. He is willing to talk to Iran, but they won't talk to him because they're crazy. They're fanatics. They're theological fanatics. And that's why they can't have a nuclear weapon. I argue to they're not isolationist friends. I don't have any isolationist friends, but I talk to my friends who are among the restrainers that, they don't want to get in any more wars or terror. I say Iran is not that. 96 hours of bombing Iran is not a war. It's not boots on the ground. There might be blowback. They might try and launch terrorist attacks, but they're already trying to kill Trump. But that's a different category. Do you agree with me, Jim, that they cannot have nukes?
Correct. But the other thing I'm kind of recognizing here is if you spend a generation, really more than a generation, right around, shortly after I was born, saying death to America at the beginning of your parliament, and they use it like a comma over there, right? Hi, how you doing? Death to America. If you do that for then you put yourself in a situation where you can't sit down and say, hey, we sat down for a summit meeting with the great Satan, and we had some really productive discussion. You can't. You've put yourself, you've rhetorically and ideologically put yourself into a corner where you literally are saying, this is the devil, this is the source of all evil in the world. And you can't come back and say, hey, look at what a great deal we have with the source of all evil in the world. And so I wonder if you could say that they're crazy, or that their ethos is so focused on the idea of us being the root of all evil that they can't talk with us, even when it's so self-evidently and clearly in their own best interest.
Now, I also think that Donald Trump does one thing over and over again. When he wants to be clear about something, is he underlines it, says it A, B, C, repeats, messages, so that when he has to use force, no one is going to be able to say, why didn't he try peace? I mean, he is clearly laying the table for bombing the crap out of, I think there are 10 nuclear sites. There might be 9. I can't remember.
I think that's a reasonable, certainly in this case, because again, for a guy who ran against the Iran nuclear deal back in 2016 and canceled it, you did not expect him to come in, or at least certainly I did not expect him to come into office and saying, yeah, I can't wait to meet with the mullahs. I'm sure we can work this out. I'm sure we can reach the deal that's, amenable to everyone. So the other thing is also, like, remember, people are thinking about, the start to this administration, Trump running on a million fronts at once and, taking actions through executive order and things like that, like really are pushing the boundaries of presidential power. I think probably since the assassination of Trump feels like he's on a very short timeline. He has to make the changes he can. He can't let it wait until tomorrow. So my suspicion is that by the end of his administration, he wants to have the Iran issue settled one way or the other. And
I want to turn to the courts very quickly. There are dozens of lawsuits. I don't even try and keep up on them for one thing. But yesterday, the Trump DOJ filed an application for an emergency appeal on a layoff case, and they added into the substance of the emergency appeal to SCOTUS, please give guidance on nationwide injunctions. Now, I don't know any conservative out there who doesn't want the Supreme Court to limit this. Do you?
Yeah. Look, first of all, there are certain things where you want the regular course of the regular order for courts cases to work their way up to the Supreme Court. Sometimes they request something expedited. Hugh, I would love to see a drive-through lane ended up at the Supreme Court, where you could simply pull up and say, hey, I'd like to get the fastest as possible and a side of fries. And they could, 9 justices, just have them there. They could even do a signal chat, Hugh. They could do some sort of thing where they're looking at, hey, do you think this one is worth a nationwide injunction? Yeah, 7-2, nah. Okay, there you go. Boom, get it right out there. Because, look, we've all kind of recognized that interest groups go out, they find the federal judge who they think, which district is the judge going to be friendliest to us? And then they file with that judge, and that judge, look, maybe I don't doubt that in many cases they genuinely believe what an administration is doing violates the Constitution in this way or that way. But because of that power as a federal judge, they say, hey, you know what? I've decided this cannot happen anywhere in the country. And people start asking who actually runs the executive branch.
And they begin to question the credibility of the federal judiciary. Jim Garrity, always a pleasure. Follow him on X at Jim Garrity. Read him in the Washington Post. Listen to him on the Editor's National Review podcast and on his own 3 Martini Lunch. Thank you, Jim. Joined now by the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show, Tarzana Joe. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Hugh. I'm feeling kind of Andy Rooney-ish today.
Oh, no.
And that's because, have you ever written a poem about something you know nothing about, but then eventually got the moral of the story right? I think I've done that. We'll see. I walked into a physics class and then did something big. I turned and left that classroom because I was taking trig.
Huh.
I saw a celebration and I would have been delighted to taste what they were serving, but I hadn't been invited. A cashier gave me too much change, and even though I'm thrifty, I pointed out I paid her with a 20, not a 50. I play a lot of money golf with that old duffer Timmy, and rarely will I ever take a gimme. If I knew your darkest secrets, I swear I wouldn't besmirch you. And with all that, I'd never claim to breathe the Prince of Virtue. But if included in a chat where bombing raids were planned, believe me when I tell you, I'd say stop and raise my hand. They say it was an accident. Who am I to tell you? But if you think that's all there is, I have a bridge to sell you. Let me tell you something, and I'll tell it to you gently. Nothing in that capital happens accidentally. Let this be a lesson when you're planning an attack. Identify the target, but you'd better watch your back. That's Integrity Gate by Tarzana Joe.
Integrity Gate will be posted, I hope, at tarzanajoe.com. And if you have any poetry need at all, just email Joe at tarzanajoe@reagan.com, tarzanajoe@reagan.com. Thank you, Joe. I got to finish by playing for you all the most important moment of the week. I'm playing it for the 5th time in 2 hours because I want to make sure all of the audience hear it. Donald Trump at the White House earlier today, cut number 15.
Iran is very high on my list of things to watch. And as you probably know, I sent them a letter just recently. And I said, you're going to have to make a decision one way or the other. and we're going to either have to talk and talk it out, or very bad things are going to happen to Iran, and I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. My big preference, and I don't say this through strength or weakness, my big preference is we work it out with Iran. But if we don't work it out, bad things are going to happen to Iran.
Watch that space this weekend and watch who covers it and who doesn't. Let me close this hour. The Hillsdale Dialogue is coming up by reminding you, this is the last time you'll hear me say in this hour, I'll tell you one more time next hour, our annual campaign for Food for the Poor wraps up today. It's your last chance to go over to HughHewitt.com and hit the banner at the top, which says Feed Their Future. $100 will feed one child in El Salvador for an entire year. Now, I do this during Lent because I like to remind people Lent is supposed to be, for Christians, a period of sacrifice and penance. There is no better way than helping the lost and the least and feeding the hungry and clothing the naked. And that's what you do for the least in El Salvador. You do for him. You can do it through Food for the Poor via my website. Over there at the very top, there's a banner that not even a Steelers fan can miss. It's called Feed Their Future. And I encourage you, please, be as generous as you can. $100, $200, $500. Thank you in advance from me for all you're doing for them.